Hi everyone, this is Xavier, and today I'll be sharing with you more about Additional Buyer's Stamp Duty, or ABSD for short. So what is ABSD? It's an additional stamp duty tax buyer has to pay when purchasing a second or subsequent properties, and these properties are: the first one would be your HDB flats, the second your residential shop houses, the third condominiums, and lastly would be your landed properties. There are two types of properties where ABSD do not apply to them. They are 1. Commercial properties and 2. Industrial properties. So how do they calculate the amount? It will be 1. Either by valuation of the property, or 2. The selling price of the property, whichever is higher. So for example, let's say if a property is valued at $900,000 and is selling for $1 million. And if a Singapore citizen wants to purchase this as their second property, the ABSD tax would be 12%. So if you take 12% times the higher amount, which is $1 million, that would come up to $120,000. I will share with you more about the rates for Singapore citizens, PR, and foreigners later on. So why is ABSD being introduced in Singapore? So it first started on 8 December 2011 after the US subprime market, and when we actually see the market recovering, the government wanted to implement a stock control measure to actually prevent a bubble from happening. The objective is also to keep the prices affordable for Singapore citizens. The latest change made on the ABSD rates was on July 2018, which I'll be sharing with you more about it. The ABSD rates for Singapore citizens for their first property is 0%, second property is 12%, and the third property is 15%. For Singaporean PR, the first property will be 5%, the second and subsequent properties will be at 15%. And for foreigners, the rate will be a flat 20% even from the first property onwards. There's a special group of foreigners that do not even need to pay ABSD even for their first property purchase. They enjoy the same privilege as a Singapore citizen under the Free Trade Agreement. They are citizens and PR of 1. Iceland, 2. Liechtenstein, 3. Norway, and 4. Switzerland. For US, it is only for their citizens only. So the next thing I want to talk about is how can you actually avoid ABSD legally without getting into trouble with the law? And there are actually 3 ways that you can do it. So the first method will be to use only one name when purchasing your first property. So this is actually the most straightforward among the 3. So when you're purchasing your condo or landed property, make sure to only use one name for the purchase. For HDB, it's slightly different as there are some restrictions. You can only purchase under the single scheme after the buyer has reached the age of 35. Next is to list your spouse as an occupier. So for an occupier, you cannot actually use your CPF OA and your income is not taken into consideration when you're taking up a mortgage loan. So this method is probably ideal for those with the financial means to get a loan under a single name to purchase the higher valued property. So the next method to avoid ABSD when purchasing your second property is to do decoupling. So decoupling is when a co-owner transfer their share of their ownership to the other by 1. Way of gift, or 2. By selling it. If it is by gift, the giver cannot have any outstanding loans and all CPF and accrued interest has to be refunded. If you purchase your spouse's share at market value, you will have to take over the bank loan, and also if any CPF or accrued interest, it has to be refunded to your spouse. One thing you have to take note of for married couples for HDB flat owners is that decoupling is not allowed. And the other thing to take note of is that even if you were to bought this property a long time ago, the owner that buys over that share is subjected to SSD, seller stamp duty, for that particular share if it is sold within the first 3 years of the transfer. So a common method of how others are actually doing decoupling is to actually purchase a private property as tenant in common. This will allow you to split the ownership of the property of your choosing. So actually most would do it 99:1%. This allows both income to be used for the mortgage loan application. And both parties' CPF OA can be used for the down payment as well as the mortgage repayment. So when you finally want to purchase that second property, sell your 1% ownership to the other spouse, who incurs a buyer's stamp duty on that 1% being transferred. The fees that will incur during this process will be 1. Your conveyancing fee for the 2 lawyers for each party, and 2. Your mortgage loan restructuring fee and penalties. And finally, the exiting party can move on to purchase another private property as a first-time buyer without incurring any ABSD. And there is also no need for the decoupling process to be completed to proceed on with the purchase. And the third method to avoid ABSD is buying through a trust. To buy a property under trust, you have to do it Crazy Rich Asian style, meaning you only can pay in full cash without taking any loan or any CPF usage. Parents can set up a property under trust for their child who is under 21 years old, who do not have the legal capacity to actually own a property. So the child will be the beneficial owner and the parent will be the trustee. So the parent will have to manage the property, such as to pay property tax and any other duties for the benefit of the child. Debtors also cannot seize the property under trust should the trustee declare bankrupt, but of course there are exceptions to this rule. Any income collected or any profit from the sale of the property will actually go to the child and not to the parent. So this method has to be done with genuine intent, else it will open a can of worms in future, and often these family disputes end up in court. Moving on to the next point would be ABSD remission for married couples. If a foreigner or a PR actually marries a Singaporean, and if it is their first matrimonial home, they do not have to pay for ABSD. ABSD can be refunded if you were to purchase your second matrimonial home as a married couple. The first matrimonial home has to be sold within 6 months after the date of purchase of the completed second property, or TOP date of the uncompleted property. The next thing would be ABSD remission under the COVID-19 Temporary Measure Act. Married Singaporean couples who plans to jointly buy or have already purchased their second property can apply to get a 1-year ABSD extension to get more time to sell their second property. To qualify for the extension, the second property has to be purchased on or after 1st June 2020. And the schedule for the sale of the first property expired on or after 1st Feb 2020. And the last thing that I want to talk about is buying a property with a party with a higher ABSD rates. So what happens when you want to buy a property with someone with a higher ABSD rate than you? So if a Singapore citizen and a foreigner wants to buy a property together and this is their second property, a 12% and a 20% rate. The higher rate will actually apply. So meaning to say that for this second property, the ABSD of 20% will actually apply here. So this comes to the end of my video. If you find the information useful, please do like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next week.